Witty, thought-provoking, and uplifting, Southern Soul Livestream is a program that you'll invite your friends over to watch every week, where you'll learn about interesting guests and get to share in their fascinating experiences. Tune in each Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern to connect with guests from across the generations and to laugh with our eclectic hosts who are as charming as they are talented. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's our host, Calvin.
We got an awesome show tonight. It's one of the ones that I've been, excited about, really anticipating. One of my not favorite topics because it's one of the hardest topics out there. And who other do we have tonight but Dr. Albert Samuel, PhD, to help us break it down. But before we do, let me just kind of describe the backdrop. Tonight we're going to be talking about Black political theories, as I call it, post-civil rights, and the history of political science and the symptoms of injustice. A wise person once said, "It is my belief that the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." And tonight we're bringing you discussion from a key article that we'll share with you tonight called Toward a Unified Theory of Justice in America by Robert Simmons. Let me read you a quote from from this article just to kind of get you started. "As long as outward-facing control is still allowed oxygen to breathe, people will continue their love-hate relationship with liberty. We will love to control the things around us, while we simultaneously hate to be controlled by the things around us. If both definitions of liberty are allowed to exist as they do in capitalism's version of democracy, fairness is doomed to always skate somewhere between the two. In our current environment, fairness is not even something anyone is looking for. If we do not constantly try to get more than what we deserve, we will inevitably end up getting less. If any one of us was to stumble or let go of the rope in this tug of war, then we would automatically forfeit all fairness to someone else." Dr. Albert Samuels is quoted saying, "Our young people are asking for more nuance and things about history, and he believes that they can handle the truth." Dr. Albert Samuels, people, Dr. Samuels, I am so excited for you to be here tonight, man. I'm excited for you to break us down, but not only for to be here. First, just tell us about yourself, and let's go into this history making day and what's going on today. Tell us about yourself, Dr. Samuels, and then let's talk.
Yeah. First of all, I thank you so much for this opportunity, to be here. I also want to give a shout out to my very good friend, Dr. Dale Green, my homie from Shreveport, who in a lot of ways is responsible for this interview taking place in the first place. First of all, I'm a very proud graduate of Southern University and A&M College, bachelor's degree in political science. I get to literally to live the dream. I have been able to come back to my alma mater, both as a professor of political science, and currently I chair the Department of Political Science and Geography at Southern University A&M College. And so we strive every day to actually give back to the students what was given to us. And I'm finishing my 23rd year here at Southern University, and I got married, 3 kids. We got 3 grandkids. Baton Rouge is home. So I'm really excited about really being here today. I feel like this is a really a propitious day, for us to be together here. First of all, I got a message that said my computer's running low. So let me reach in here and pull out my charger.
Good idea. Good idea. It's always
pull
that
out
moment.
my pull
And,
out my charger because I've had to use my laptop today a lot more than I normally do. I normally do because I'm having issues with my desktop, so it doesn't usually get this much work. This much work.
that is all right. All right. You know, I think it's an awesome opportunity why he handles that. Dr. Samuels has had opportunity to get back and teach political science and, support his department as chair at his alma mater. I mean, boy, that just sounds like a lot of opportunity, a lot of fun, man. I mean, kudos to you because I can only imagine the awesomeness, and I'm pretty sure people are curious about how they can pursue a career or, get on down there where you are and probably enroll. So we'll talk about that a little later, but I think you're good now, right? All right, all right.
I think we got we're plugged in.
So today in history.
Yeah. But today, we saw the confirmation of Judge, soon to be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, as
Awesome.
the first African American woman to sit on the United States Supreme Court. And I'm like, excuse my French, but it's about damn time.
Amen.
I mean, this is really an exciting day, and I'm sort of, I think last, it might have been last week or so, a week before last, I can't remember now. We in one of my classes, we actually played the, I guess, the speech that our good brother Cory Booker did. You know, I there were some long excerpts of that speech on some of the cable news programs, but to get the full effect of what Cory Booker had to say, you had to hear all of it. And so I had my class listen to all of it, and to and to and Cory Booker is a very affable person. Even with a lot of his Republican colleagues who disagree with him, and so but in a very polite but in a very forceful way. The part that they didn't show on TV is how he just systematically took apart, Josh Hawley, and for this disingenuous attack on Judge Brown. And in fact, what he did was he quoted from a conservative magazine, the National Review. He said, I don't make it a habit of agreeing with the National Review." But even they said that this was a disingenuous attack on Brown. But it's the level. I think I think one of the point he made. Maybe we should take his. He took the high road in a way. But he says that with all this stuff, says you're not going to steal my joy. You're not going to steal our joy.
Wow.
He said he's talking about how exciting it was. As he talked about how he and Kamala were in the office with the president as they were trying to figure out who should we nominate, and they were kind of like pitching themselves like Mr. President, do you know what this means? What this means? How he was jogging and said a woman almost tackled him. Just the joy she felt from seeing someone like her sitting up there about to be sworn in, and I'm just admire. I just admire the the intelligence, the dignity that she displayed, despite some very vicious attempts to try to make her look small, to make her look like she didn't deserve to be there. I mean, and it seemed like the second day, when it was obvious that they couldn't outsmart her, that they just sort of removed any pretense that this was about constitutional theory, and they just kept asking the same things over again, and they were getting madder and madder and madder because they were. I think it was just designed. Just, let's just see if we can get her upset, because then we'll say that she's just an angry black woman. Now, mind you, okay, Brett Kavanaugh acted a complete fool before the committee. I mean, he screaming at the community, losing his temper. I like beer. Still like beer. I mean, do you like beer still at the club, Bashar? I mean, yeah, but that was okay because he's a white man. That's okay. But if Ketanji Brown Jackson had raised her voice once, or out of control once, then she would have been the angry black woman, and they would have questioned her temperament. You know, see, we told you. You see, we told you. She doesn't deserve to be here. And so I think in that hearing we saw all we need to know about why we have a problem in this country. I mean, they didn't even have the decency to stay in the chamber for the final calling of the vote. You know, it seemed like it's not possible that every Republican had a plane to catch at the same time. But you know, I mean, but some of them they couldn't wait to get out of the chamber. Lindsey Graham wasn't even in the chamber. He purposely didn't even wear a necktie, which is like a requirement to be on the floor of the chamber. So he had to vote outside the chamber as his own personal show of disrespect for this well qualified woman who was more qualified than almost everybody who was on the court at the time they were nominated. But but enough about them. This is a great day.
Today is a great day.
Great day.
A quote I read earlier, so it's on social media when the news hit. A young lady says, as a black female attorney, I am literally crying right now that Ketanji Brown Jackson is our first. And, just the impact that it has on people is so significant. So tell me this, Dr. Samuels, right? You've been teaching for some 23 years, you've been, at your alma mater. Tell me, I talked about these broad topics, right? This post-civil rights political theories, traditionalism, reformism, critical race theory. What is your take on all that? I mean, do you think, it's as big a deal as people say, or, what really are you teaching? What really is happening in the classroom? What are some true challenges that you are seeing personally?
Yeah. Again, thank you. I appreciate the question. I always, one of the ways I try to start off any black politics class or something like this is by saying that the beginnings of black politics, or the existential question in black politics, is that, number one, we are the only group of folk who didn't ask to come here. And so the fundamental existential question of Black politics or African American politics or whichever term you prefer is now that we are here, what do we do about it? That's it. And I would, and so when we start getting those debates that you mentioned, we have not always been of one mind about how we approach that situation. And I think that, to be fair, I think one of the issues that uh, seems to bedevil Black politics, and it's not just Black people who think this, and other oppressed groups think this as well around the world. So we're not sometimes as different as we think we are, and that is, uh, there's the belief that the fact that we have had this common history of racism and discrimination and oppression, uh, the fact that we have this common experience of that, there's this belief that somehow merely the mere fact that we have had this common experience by itself is an organizing principle. That is, since we all had the same experience, that somehow we should all think alike, and then we somehow act like we're shocked when it's not. But that has never been the case. We have never been of the same mind as to how we deal with the fact that we were forcibly brought here and oppressed, or by the fact that we came to a country which actually it actually wrote a document that supposedly its first principles are, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and at the time this was being written, the principal author of it was a slaveholder, and one of the British men of letters, say, how is it that the loudest yelps of liberties comes from the drivers of Negroes? So that has always been with us, and so, so we, but I mean, I think that's one way we need to situate these debates, as a lot of these debates are not new.
Hmm.
You know, we've always debated. We've always had a different minds now about this. There have always been some among us who have been more, whether it's conservative, whether it's traditional. There have always been those among us who have kind of had the view that basically this is our country. We ain't going back to Africa. This is our country. It's just as much our country as everybody else's. And we have as much, if more, of a right to claim this country. In fact, we even have we even have co-opted the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And whether it was David Walker,
Hmm.
who uh, you know his appeal in some way was a rebuttal to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, because the same Thomas Jefferson who wrote the Declaration of Independence, he also wrote another document a lot of people are less familiar with, and that's called the Notes on the State of Virginia. And there's a section in there which he speculates about the inferiority of Negroes, because if they're inferiors, then when they certainly are not the equals of white men, then I guess they can be justly not included in the we into the we the people. Uh, but then David Walker said, well, are we not men? Are we not men? You know what? We sometimes talk a lot about what was the framers' intent. There are whole arguments and schools of thought about what was the framers' intent. And and that has its place. But I would argue a lot of times, sometimes it's what it's sometimes there. It was the unintended consequences sometimes of what the framers put in place that are actually a lot of times more significant, because we can have an academic discussion about what do they really mean by saying all men are created equal. You know, surely they didn't mean this. Surely they probably didn't. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because whether or not they meant it or not, they said it. And because they said it, black folk called them on it.
Yep.
In fact, every group who was at some point or another excluded from the original definition of we the people has been able to come back to that Declaration of Independence and say, why not us? Why not us? That's what the women did at Seneca Falls. And then they said, they just rewrote the Declaration and said all men and women are created equal. And so that's also part of the story.
Go ahead. I was getting ready to do a follow on, but what were you going to say?
And so that's one side of it. And then of course there are also those who have also argued that America is so fundamentally and incurably racist. That's the nationalist perspective. That notion is America will never accept black people as equals. And so, in that sense, integration is probably a waste of integrationism, assimilationism, trying to reform the system is probably a waste of time. We need our own. We need our own country. And so that's sort of the black nationalist perspective. So there are those who have adopted elements of that, but they're not willing to go the full length of saying we should have our own country, but maybe we should control the institutions in our institutions. We should be leery of integrating. We should control the economies of our communities. We should have black colleges. We should black other colleges, we the knowledge. That's also another perspective. And of course there's a lot of discussion today about critical race theory. Which we can have a discussion about too. So but the point is there's a whole a rainbow of ideas about this, but it shouldn't surprise us.
Yeah, as you say, we're not supposed to,
because we've always disagreed.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate it because as I begin to chat with you and kind of think, it just makes perfect sense, right? How do you get, as you described, a whole group of people agree just because they have that one thing in common, right? In reality, it's natural for us to think differently. It's natural for us to have different perspectives. And I like the way you describe the nationalists because that's what I see a lot of, right? The nationalists, it seems like their voice is the strongest, the harshest, the hey, we need to do this. And then, I'm also curious about, your perspective on the different groups like the traditionalists, right? The Clarence Thomas, the John McWhorter, and things like that. I feel like if it was a puzzle, each group has a different piece of the puzzle. I don't feel that they're necessarily wrong. I just feel like they may have a different piece of the puzzle. But I don't know. That's my thought. What's your take on it?
Well, again, it's not my point is that it's not that conservatives are wrong by everything. I would never say that they're wrong by everything. But I guess the interesting thing about at least some of this version of some of the conservatives, in particular, is conservatism as it oftentimes as it manifests itself, particularly in this particular moment, especially among Black conservatism, is primarily aimed at denying, to a large degree, that racism is systemic. Uh, it's essentially saying that that Black people should move forward on their own individual efforts, and if we're not succeeding, it's our fault, or we're engaging in some type of self-sabotage, or we're depending on liberal government programs, or you know, and actually, and be honest with you, they honestly get more visibility than their numbers in the Black community deserve, and precisely because they are Black faces saying what white people want to hear. There is always a market in America for the Black person who, quite frankly, is willing to sell out his people. For the Black person who is willing to criticize other Black people in front of white folks. In fact, it's like entertainment to white people. But I also argue that, but I want to say this too. I think we should also say this. This is not just a conservative. I call it a hustle, but it's not just a conservative hustle. It's also a liberal hustle.
Yes, yes.
Liberal hustle, because because for example, when President Obama was president, you couldn't beat Cornel West and Terry Smiley. They didn't miss an opportunity to get in front of somebody's microphone and talk about all the things that Barack Obama wasn't doing, and how he wasn't legitimately serving the interests of Black people, and how he wasn't doing this, and how he was just simply a representative of the corporate elite and corporate establishment, etc. And keep in mind, understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that President Obama shouldn't be criticized. I mean, I disagree with Obama on a lot of things, on a range of things, while he was president. So I would never say that he or any politician was beyond criticism. The issue, but it was the mean spiritedness of the criticism a lot of times. It was the lack of balance and proportionality to the experience. It was almost, they acted as if Obama was the king and could do whatever he wanted, and he just simply chose not to. And they seemed to actually forget that there was something called a Congress, that and the Republican Party that resisted every single thing he did, even when he agreed with positions that they supposedly believed in for years. But their criticism had no proportionality, oftentimes no context. In the context, and by the way, and who, by the way, anointed them as the spokesman for the Black community anyway. But so but white folks gave him an audience, and I could see them on, they'd be on CNN, or they'd be on this program and that program and Democracy Now, So I think it's a bipartisan hustle.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I'm concerned.
Well, thanks for that, because I was definitely thinking about the Reformists, right? The Cornel West, the Michael Eric Dyson, the Michael Browns, and I like the way you also describe. If it is true that the system is so inherently racist, is it even possible that reforming it can be successful? So you kind of answered the question before I even got to the question because, reform is one thing. And then, I like this part because earlier I kind of joked with you that, they kind of list you as a limited separation philosopher. But then you were like, I don't know. So it sounds like that's not necessarily your take on things. But, with the likes of a Cheryl Cashin, Professor Roy L. Brooks, they categorize you with, who else? Derek A. Bell Jr. Do you consider those your peers, or would you consider yourself a limited separationist?
Well, I'd like to resist labels, because they oftentimes they limit our imagination,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes there are elements that we can pull from various theories, and of course, right, some of the things some of the things that I wrote, for example, some of the things I wrote in, for example, is the separate unequal. That book was published in 2004. My views have changed since then. That was almost 20 years ago. Um, you know, I the critical insight that critical race theory has right, you know, is the structural nature of racism. You know, that I like to analogize it to a house. You know, there's one view of American politics that racism is sort of like the room in the house that we hide from company. In other words, America's history of racial discrimination is the great blemish on an otherwise enlightened democratic experiment. So if we could just get that right, and keep in mind that's actually the liberal position on race. That's if we could just get that part right. Oftentimes we can just get that part right, but they resist the notion that America is fundamentally structurally racist. We can just reform it some, we can just get that part right. Then we can have a society that truly lives up to its ideals. Uh, I prefer to think of racism is in the foundation of the house. It's in the plumbing system of the house. You know, you know, it's in the it's in the electrical system. System, it's in the HVAC system. You know, my dad's a bricklayer, so he was. It's all mixed in with the dirt and the mortar, and all the things you need to put the bricks together. That's and so if we're going to address in order to deal with white supremacy, you need a new house.
Mm-hmm.
How? And too often in this country, when America has had to choose between democracy and white supremacy, America chooses white supremacy. Consistently. What was the Civil War was about? They were willing to destroy the Union, the whole Republican experiment. In other words, if we can't have slavery, it's over. We're out. And they were willing to destroy the entire Union over that.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I agree with what you're saying about the foundation. Definitely. So much so, and I'll be honest, it was up until around, I thought since I was born looking like this that I understood racism.
Mm-hmm.
But only within the last few years, and I read 5 to 10 different books, that I began to see that what you say is so true. It is in the DNA of everything we do. Government, country, black folks, white folks, it is in our DNA. So much so, it's almost close to being impossible. My personal perspective, as illustration of how I describe it, And this is for the good, Christian small church people out there who know what it's like to have that born again experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what would it look like in this institution, this thing that's so inherently racist that it's in the DNA of everything we touch and do? What if we had the opportunity to be born again? To be born again, afresh, anew, with everything that we have learned. Think about what we learned. I would like to talk about your book, and then I know we got some questions popping up, and then we're going to wrap up, but I got a couple questions for you before we go to the audience. So if you're raising your hand, if you're curious, we're going to do 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll get into our group discussion, but 2 questions for Dr. Samuels. First question. I want to hear about your book, Is Separate Unequal? Because one thing you said something changed, right? From 2004 to now when you published it. And then, I would like to get your recommendation from over 20 years of teaching, of watching this nation, this political system evolve in front of your eyes. Things happen that we could not have even imagined would happen in our lifetime happen. I would love your thoughts, your hope, your guidance, and suggestions. As you say, there's not one silver bullet. There's various theories. There's not people who think alike. I would like to get that part too. But let me go back to the original question. Is separate unequal? This is your book, 2004, about HBCUs. Tell us about the book and tell us about what you learned and how you've grown since that. Tell us about that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. But actually, this book actually grew out of initially some of my experiences actually here at Southern University. I was a student at Southern when we were going through a higher education desegregation lawsuit. They were attempting to get rid of our board and actually merge our law school with LSU's and kind of merge us out of existence. And so I was in student government when that was happening. And so I got involved in just researching the issue to advise the president. So one thing led to the other. It became a paper for Black politics, and make a long story short, that helped me to firm up the decision to work on my PhD. And while I was about to go to LSU for my PhD, the Supreme Court made a decision in the case of the United States versus Fordyce, Mississippi. And Mississippi. That was the case in which this is really the first case that deals with what do systems of higher education need to do to show that they've done enough. And so I was concerned about, in the desegregation process, what happens to Black colleges? Must Black colleges be merged or eliminated, or in order for integration of Brown to take place, or do they still have do they have a vital place, or can they be defended constitutionally? And so that was sort of what the book was about, and kind of walking through sort of the history of these cases and how that came in the Supreme Court and some of the things it raises. And so what came out of the idea was that the whole liberal integrationist model seemed to it also not take enough stock of the significant contributions of historically black colleges. It seemed to be premised on this idea that in order for Black people to get an equal education, they had to go to a predominantly white institution. And it's not either or, it's both and. And in fact, there are things that and sometimes if white folk could understand, there are actually some things that we could teach you. So that's kind of whether where the book where the book has come. I think that one of the ways my thinking has evolved, as I started to study the longer you started studying the history of America, we start to see that this is we see patterns reoccurring. We're current, like what the period we're going through right now. We've seen this before. We saw this in the backlash to the Brown decision. We saw this during Reconstruction. In other words, every time Black people appear to be making progress in society, there's a backlash. And sometimes that backlash can be it's quite violent. Uh, you know, uh, that's what the whole debate about critical race theory is about. Because people were starting to have discussions about systemic racism. There were some things that were happening quite quickly. In relation, this was the longest sustained period of social protest that we've seen since the civil rights movement. And some things were happening, and we started, and people started giving money, huge, big sums of money to Black institutions, and this is now we're starting to deal with real power, and that's a threat. And so that's what the pushback is about, and that's what's driving this whole debate about critical race theory. It has nothing to do with critical race theory itself. You know, it's but they have a vested interest in preserving this idea that racism is simply today a matter of individual bad people who are prejudiced. We can deal with that, but there's not a systemic problem. And if there's not a systemic problem, then there's no rationale for affirmative action. If it's not a systemic problem, then we don't need federal voting rights protectors anymore. And you certainly can't have any discussion about reparations or any of that stuff, because and so if Black people are continuing or at the bottom, it's because it's their fault. It's their fault, and they have no one to blame. We've done everything we can do. Everything we do.
Wow. Wow, that is powerful. That is powerful. You know, let's go to some questions and we'll give you a chance to wrap up on that last one. So I just want to get Tamika, Katie, just a couple questions. We're at the top of the hour, so we don't want to keep Dr. Samuels much longer. But let's give an audience a chance, to ask a few questions. I see we got all kinds of people in the audience. So feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, type in your question in the chat. And what do we have? I see Shanika. Actually, I just saw, I'm going to read this one because I see that one in the chat. And for anyone else, you can prepare yourself by typing your question or preparing to take yourself off mute. Shanika, she says, my question is, how do a large portion of people, some of us included, still holding fast to support of 45, aka Trump, and his Trumpisms, despite having clear evidence that refutes their beliefs? Is it fixable? Because I've resigned the fact that maybe it is not. So that's her question. And I read it the best way I could. But at the same time, I think we kind of see where she's going. Now, that's a tough question. You want to speak to that a little bit, Dr. Samuels?
Well, yeah, I think that that question. People sometimes believe what they want to believe. If you think about this, you know what? You had people for example, let me just use a biblical analogy. Okay, you have example of Jesus driving out demons, and the Pharisees see this happening, and say, "Well, it is by Beelzebub, the devil, basically, that he drove out demons." In other words, you know what? You know what? If people are determined to believe something, no amount of evidence will convince them otherwise. And see, one of the things we got to understand, particularly about white supremacy, white and racism. Racism is fundamentally irrational. You know, you know, and so that means it's impervious to evidence. In order to be a racist, you must believe things about the world that aren't true. Number one. Number two, you must be willing to continue to hold to those beliefs, even when you're presented with evidence to the contrary. You must either deny them entirely, or you must find a way to explain them away. and so it's the same kind of mentality. Once people decide that this is what they want to believe, if it makes them feel good about themselves, if it validates their worldview, or whatever it is, there's no amount of evidence that's going to convince them otherwise. So sometimes you need to. There are people who are genuinely persuadable, and that's probably where your focus needs to be.
On the other people, they're going to believe what they want to believe. Great example. We have a question from Dr. Shanice Nelson. Feel free, you can unmute yourself. And I see we also got a question from Kevin Jones. We're going to get that one next. So, Dr. Shanice Nelson, do you mind going with your question?
Yes. So my question to Dr. Samuels is that what do you think are the state of Black politics? I mean, do we, although we've always had these varying opinions about what Black people should do in response to its own political structure here in the United States, do you believe that we even have a Black politic today at all, regardless of the fact that we have been fractured?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a large question that is kind of hard to address within this framework. I will say this, that we are at a very interesting moment right now in our development. Because literally much of the gains of the civil rights movement are under attack in a way that they never have been before. Even despite we celebrated Ketanji Brown's not successful confirmation. The fact of the matter, when you think about voting rights are under attack. To a degree that we haven't seen right now in America since the 1890s. The Supreme Court is probably going to be considering either this term or next term a case that could overturn affirmative action once and for all. And so in some ways, while some of us and some of us are making advances, and in a lot of ways, we are as a community, uh, are under attack in some ways, that actually resemble the politics of the last century, the early part of the last century, not the latter part of the last century.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just we're going to dig into that one with the group discussion. So just so you guys know what to expect now is we're going to do two more questions for Dr. Samuels. Then we're going to transition to a group discussion. And this would be a good idea to kind of talk about some local, what we call the local landscape type opportunities. So I'm going to do two more questions. We got Kevin Jones. His question is, what advice do you have for someone running for office for the first time, challenging the status quo mentally among our people within the justice system? I can give you backdrop on this gentleman if you need more for that question.
Yeah, that would help, please.
Yeah, so this particular individual is actually running for district judge, in his local community. And he's been doing an awesome job. But I guess I can imagine he's probably, seeing some status quo behavior, some status quo mentally. And what does it take to challenge that or to get people to a different place in the community? So I anticipate, and feel free, Kevin, if you want to unmute yourself and add anything to the question if I'm butchering your question. But there's your opportunity if you want to unmute and add anything to that.
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. I don't know if can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, the basic premise of the question is that I'm running against an incumbent that's been on the bench about 12 years, and based on this discussion tonight, in my opinion, she's somewhat adopted some of these ideas that African Americans we just need to do better. We just need to do better. And when you're on the bench and you have that mindset, and you're not really acknowledging some of the barriers that our people face within our society, you become overly punitive in how you treat the people that appear before the court. And so my campaign is just based on like, let's push past this status quo mentality. Let's not adopt some of these racial prejudice views in how we administer justice. And so, but the surprising thing for me is that there's a lot of pushback amongst our own people that feel like that have that idea. Well, I've got here, so you need to do the same thing. I was able to rise above, so you need to do it too, and never really want to acknowledge some of the systemic issues that we face as a people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that, well, I appreciate the question here. I think that, first of all, whenever you decide to challenge an establishment, expect some pushback. Any establishment that's worth its salt is going to push back, and it's going to have some, and sometimes people are going to push back or whatever it is because they don't see a viable alternative, or what have you. So I tell you, don't be discouraged. Don't take it personal. Take it personal. I just tell you, you identify. Identify the issues that you believe are important. I think listen to the voters. Listen to the voters. And hear their concerns and be their voice and go for it. And I'm not gonna because a lot of establishments need to be a challenge, and somebody needs to take it. You know but to challenge an establishment, you have to have a really compelling reason to do so. And so expect some pushback. In fact, I was taking it as a badge of honor. Mm-hmm. And keep pushing. And I don't want to, and I don't want to say that and I don't want to say this because it sounds like we just people are running just to make a point. I know I would run to win. I'm running to win. But sometimes sometimes it takes more than one time to beat an establishment. I think for example, Cory Booker lost the first time he challenged the mayor of Newark, and he came back. So hopefully your race will turn out differently. But establishments are established for a reason.
Yeah, thank you for that. And your answer definitely reminded me of the term of the Society of One, and it's in that article that I shared. I'll share it again. Society of One, being the only black in a white institution and thus being held up to white standards. It is not good enough for blacks to be themselves. They must be like white Americans. To be racially neutral, to be white or not, is draining to having to be someone else other than yourself. But I'm going to share that article again, but it's a great summary. And I think we're at the end of our question. Dr. Samuels, I want to say thank you for your opportunity, for being here tonight, for chopping it up with us. I know you're a busy man, but man, I'm glad that I have favor, also known as I know good people, right? And thank you for the favor that allowed you to be here tonight. Thank you for Dr. Darrell Green for dropping down the favor and letting us know that for you to be here tonight was awesome. Just want to give you a chance to do a closing statement of anything that's on your mind that you didn't get a chance to say. And for the people who are here, hang tight. If you're here for Dr. Samuels, then I know you're going to leave, but we're going to have some guys that are from Tennessee and from Oklahoma who are involved in the local community talk about what's working well for them. And we're going to talk about Dr. Samuels, when he going. We're going to he did it good. And, he brought it down. And we'll have a good discussion. So feel free to hang tight. But before we transition to that, Dr. Samuels, any closing statements or closing remarks before we lose you?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think the one thought that comes to mind as we close is that many of us have the feeling of kind of deja vu. There's a sense that we seem like we're fighting the same battles that our parents fought in the 50s and 60s. We thought some of this voter suppression and stuff was over. But Frederick Douglass had it right. That power never concedes anything about the man. It never has, and it never will. But I always like to tell my students that there's another side of that, and that's that those who have been forced to concede power, because they didn't really give us anything. We took it. We forced them to concede some rights to us. But those who have been forced to it, they always try to take it back. And they may not always take it back in the same way that they exercised it before. In fact, sometimes they actually find more stickier ways to do it. But we should always expect the pushback. So we need to stop always asking ourselves, why are we dealing with this? Because the folks who lost power, they didn't just go away and just say, okay, black people, y'all right. We've been stealing from y'all for 300 years, and we're just gonna let y'all have it. That's not how this thing works. And my point is that that's not unique to America. That's the way power works in the world. That's just the way it is. Whether it was England, whether it's France, that's just the way it is. And so I think we just need to get our minds around this idea that even when we make gains, we got to constantly be vigilant. But at the same time, I will also like to remind you that, that you think about Brown v. Board, we always think about Brown v. Board, but we don't think about the fact that it took them 20 years to build the momentum for that. In other words, they didn't wait until it was an ideal time. They started that campaign during the middle of the Depression. So now is not the time to get discouraged. Keep the fight on. Keep the fight going.
Awesome. And, thank you. And, Senator Lou Frederick, I'm going to give you a chance to say a few words. We have Democratic Senator Lou Frederick from District 22, Portland. And if you want to just say a few words, thank you, Dr. Samuels, for being here. And we're going to chop it up. Feel free to hang out or, get back to running your business. But Senator Lou Frederick, any kind words you want to share with us tonight?
Well, I enjoyed listening to Dr. Samuel. I've got to, first of all, give a little bit of my credentials. I went to Southern University Laboratory School when I was a kid back, and my father was a professor at Southern University in the 50s and early 60s. In fact, that's a little research project for one of your students to find out what happened, because he's the one who stood up and said that he was supporting the students who went down to downtown Baton Rouge and got tear gas, and that's why we ended up leaving in 1962. So it's a little bit of a little history there. I guess I'm that's a key element for why I'm on this. I wanted to hear what Dr. Samuels had to say. We are in the middle of lots of things. I think he's identified it really clearly. We struggle with an attempt to return to Reconstruction, to the backlash of the following Brown versus Board of Education. I desegregated my high school in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was there. So I was one of the 8 folks who ended up going into that school. So there's lots of things going on. We really have to understand just what that backlash is about, how we approach it, and how we understand the strength that we actually have, and also the strategies that are being used to make sure that we are in fact split up. There's a real strategy to try to break up the kinds of programs, the kinds of support that people have, finding one thing that we can disagree on, and then say, well, you see, you disagree with that person, so that's another black person. You just can't trust them. You can't work with them on all sorts of things. That's a strategy that's a very, very effective one. But in places like Portland, in Oregon, where we have 2% African American in Oregon, that's a whole nother story I could tell you. But we have done some things here that have been different. When I started in the Oregon Senate, in Oregon House, I was the only black person in the Oregon House. There was a black woman in the Oregon Senate. This last legislative session that was in February and March, we had 15 people of color in the Oregon, out of 90 in the Oregon House and Senate. And we will have more come the next election, because people have decided that they are not going to sit back and wait to make some decisions and understand what the system is like and begin to change things. So that's what we're about. I think we need to keep talking with one another everywhere, not just Louisiana or in Oregon or in DC or in up in New England or wherever. We need to keep in mind that this is a long-term effort. And if we don't keep understanding that this does not happen overnight, we're going to lose that. We're going to lose that momentum, and we need to keep that momentum going.
Awesome. I'm going to say goodbye to Dr. Samuels. Dr. Samuels, thank you for being here with us. Anything you want to say before you disappear?
Well, again, I just thank you so much for this opportunity. Again, I want to thank my brother Daryl Green for making me aware of this program and this opportunity, and much love to you and by the way, and I love y'all's music.
Yeah. Well, make sure you come on back, because I like to play, as they say, some of my daddy's records. So come on back when you're less busy, and we're gonna keep doing what we do. But we're here every Thursday, so thank you. And I'm gonna let you go because I know you got a lot going on. But I thank you for being here, and we're gonna talk to our brothers on this side. Thank you, Dr. Albert Samuels.
Thank you. Yeah.
So Senator Lou Frederick, great introduction, great segue, because what you just did is gave us the perfect segue into our next session. So for the people who are curious, for the people who wants to know, hey, similar to what Dr. Lou Frederick said, hey, they're doing some things in Portland. We have Timothy Young from Oklahoma. And I'm curious about what they're doing in Oklahoma. We have LeBron Hill from Tennessee. But let's just go ahead and get started. LeBron, you mind getting us started, man? Tell the people who you are, what you do, your background, and, just introduce yourself so we can kind of understand. Then we're going to talk about Tennessee, and we're going to talk about, Oklahoma. And it seems like we may get to hear some more about Portland. But go ahead, LeBron.
Yeah, so I'm LeBron Hill. I'm the opinion and engagement journalist here at the Tennessean, based in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been working here for about 3 years now. I came from Lipscomb University, which is also in Nashville. It's a predominantly white institution. It was a Christian college, so a lot of different experiences there. My background is in journalism. I've been doing opinion journalism since college. My first piece was this very odd piece about the situation at Lipscomb called Cotton Gate, where the professor or the president of the school invited all Black students to his to his house. And when we got there, and I was there present, and when we got there, there was we went to the outside of his house, and there was a line a buffet line of Black stereotypical food, like fried chicken, ribs, hot greens, all that stuff. And then there was a cotton on every table on the outside patio had cotton on. And it was this whole thing. And but long story short, I ended up writing a piece about that. And that was what catapulted my career in opinion journalism. So
awesome. I love your story because when I talk to friends, they say, well, certain people haven't got it. Do y'all realize that cotton and rope is not decoration for when you invite Black people to your house? Brother Timothy from Oklahoma, tell us about you, what you do, what's your background, and, where you served. I think you've served in city council.
That's correct. Yeah, I'm Timothy Young. I live in Shawnee, Oklahoma, which is about 30 miles east of Oklahoma City. I'm an educator in Oklahoma City, middle school. And here in Shawnee, of course, after being an educator, I'm also an entrepreneur. So I'm a baker. I have a salsa on the market as well. And I'm definitely a community leader. I'm a grassroots person. And so here we are, putting together our local community, the former community. And what we're doing today, our community is called Dunbar Heights. And so what we're doing is we have to eliminate a few things to get these things going. Some of the things we have to eliminate is the mentality. We got a mentality that we don't need to support one another. See, we're brainwashed to think that. And we have to support each other as Black folks and come together. And we got to do one block at a time. And so as we start things together and start loving one another and getting rid of the hate, the negative mentality that we've been so indoctrinated with for so many years that we can't trust somebody who's darker than you are, that type of mentality. But being able to, come up with a game plan to help rebuild our community and rebuild our community, we ran into something that hopefully some politics, the land is separated by 25-foot lots. Okay. And, you have a house that's, 50, sitting on 2 lots at 50 feet. Well, the city council changed things up and say you can only build on a 60-foot lot. Mm-hmm. And, straight up redlining and, in this area, I don't know what it is. But anyway, I've had conversations with the mayor and city managers and we come together and they're rallying around to support what we're doing as we regrow our community. And so we're having a reunion this year, Juneteenth, where we're going to be asking everyone to come back home. It's come back together. And so being in our community and just, look at the things that the possibilities that are there. We know it's a food desert. We have no fresh fruit, within walking distance. Transportation is weak. Things are taking place. And so what we're doing here is, coming together, cities at a time, blocks at a time, and find out what the problems are and moving forward, even have an economic plan to move along with it. But we have to understand the first thing that we do as Black folks, we got to understand, okay? George Fraser said this best. He said, white folk ain't thinking about Black folk, aren't thinking about Black folks, and Black folks aren't thinking about Black folks. We got mentality. We must start looking at each other. Our answer to our issues will be to come together.
Awesome.
So that's one of the things that we're getting this thing going.
Thank you, Brother Timothy. Let me shift to back to LeBron, and then I'm have one or two questions for Senator Lou Frederick. So, LeBron, what do you think about the speaker? Right? I mean, he covered the topic. He talked about a lot. And man, you got to be a quick listener or have heard these terms a lot to keep up. What's your thought? What's your take on it? And also just give us insight on what you see going on in Tennessee. Because the way I see it, I invited you here because you're plugged in, right? You write on political topics, you manage groups to make sure that people are informed. What are some things that the speaker talked about that really caught your attention? And tell us about the local landscape there in Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I thought was, interesting about, his time was just how, he talked about, now Justice Brown Jackson's, now officially becoming justice. And so I think one of the things I think is interesting that I took out of it, just kind of bouncing off what he thought, was that, Tim Scott, who was a Black senator, he voted no to her nomination. And I think that for me, it was just very just kind of earth shattering a little bit, just thinking of how, you heard Cory Booker and his, and his connection to that and how he was able to connect not only just with, Jackson, but also just the fact that, they share a lineage. We all share a lineage. We all share a legacy as Black people. And so I think that, it kind of shows that political landscape and how we are in a place now that there are, it's kind of a breaking down of the thought that there's a Black monolith, that there are, there are people who may not go, who are Black, who may not necessarily want to, lean this way where everyone else is going. So I think that was a very interesting point that I thought in my head once Mr. Samuel was speaking. I mean, so the political landscape for me, or political landscape in Tennessee, right now we're in a supermajority. It's Republican ran, and it's not necessarily say it's a bad thing, but I think for a lot of people, in Tennessee, a lot of Black people in Tennessee, they feel left out of the political process here. And I think that comes into just, the fact that, a lot of there are a lot of things that have been put in place here in Tennessee that hinder things like the critical race theory ban, which I'm sure is, many states have picked up a ban in some sort of fashion. I know that there have been a lot of, I know that in Tennessee, we have a lot of nonprofits that focus on voter rights, and like Organized Tennessee and Equity Alliance are two that come to mind. They're both nonprofits that focus on either getting Black voters registered or just fighting for and advocating for voting rights. Right now, I think that there's just a lot of grassroots movements that are taking place, and I think that it shows it's a good sign of things to come. There's this African American clergy collective that was created that is a coalition of preachers and religious leaders that are going to come together and hopefully through the Black church create more engagement in politics within the Black community. So there's a lot that's going on that's trying to go, because again, we're in a super majority, and if you want to get in the deep thickness of politics, Republicans have usually it's kind of they don't necessarily focus in our communities. I think that's just kind of been proven throughout our American history, and so I think there have been, again, like Black leaders and thinkers in Tennessee have said, well, how can we do this without without their help, because they're not trying to help us. How can we advocate for our community? So yeah, that's kind of a snapshot of what's going on in Tennessee.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm curious with something that Senator Lou Frederick said earlier, because in having discussed with you and Timothy beforehand, you guys are very close to your local community. You're concerned, you're passionate, but at the same time, I heard some good news. Senator Lou Frederick talks about some of the things that they're doing in Portland that's working. I'm definitely curious if you guys have any questions for him, within that whole start, stop, and continue of some of the things that is working in Portland that maybe can be deployed in Tennessee or Oklahoma. So any questions that you, Timothy, or you, LeBron, would have for Senator Frederick?
Well, for me, it's not necessarily about. I just want to know, how is it being, one of the minority, senators or state people in your state? How has that been? I'm not familiar with Oregon, but I'd love to
Well, I got to tell you, Oregon is a bit bizarre. It's certainly, I grew up in partly in Baton Rouge, partly in Atlanta, Georgia, also in Illinois and Rhode Island. So I spent a lot of time in different places, but most of my school years were spent in the South, in Louisiana and Georgia, in Atlanta. So I spent a lot of time. My father was a professor at HBCU schools. He graduated from Tuskegee. He taught at Southern. He taught at Atlanta University, Howard, Central States, and died just a couple of years ago teaching it at Tuskegee. So I had a sense of that kind of experience there. But Oregon is a very different beast altogether. Just to give you a sense, the Oregon Constitution has in it a section, when it started the state, it had in a section that said blacks could not spend more than 24 hours in one place, or they would be whipped. That was part of the Constitution, and it was, although it was no longer officially enforced at a certain point, because a lot of black folks moved up here to work in World War II. It did not, that particular part of the Constitution was not officially taken out of the Constitution until 2002, when we had to have a vote to get it out of the Constitution, and a third of the Oregonians voted to keep it in the Constitution. So that's gives you a sense of some of the things that have taken place here. So it is a very different kind of thing. Having said that, it's also very much more of sees itself often as much more of a liberal state in terms of people, not necessarily in terms of territory, because there's a lot of territory here. But you don't. But as I keep saying, the jackrabbits and the junipers don't vote. So there's a lot of territory, but the people tend to be more towards the progressive, certainly in the cities, more towards the progressive bent, and so that's why we have all of the statewide offices are Democratic right now. All of the we had this session, more than half of the House of Representatives in the state of Oregon was women. Were women. We've had a number of other things. We don't know what this next election is going to really look like because of all of the significant effort by way of the national folks and the previous president to try to make things look as bad as possible. And so we're still reeling a little bit from that, as well as just issues in terms of homelessness and food and education issues as well that we're struggling with. So we have a lot of things that we're trying to deal with here. It's a different beast than Tennessee. Where are you in Tennessee? I'm sorry.
Nashville.
And Tennessee and Oklahoma. Same. They're very different kinds of things, but we have some of the same issues in terms of housing, economic issues, and I mean housing not in terms. We have housing, just having enough housing, but also redlining. Adjusting the boundaries so that you can only have a certain number of, it has to be a single family home. How do you address those kinds of things? We have those kinds of issues, and we have the health issues. I put in the chat earlier an article that I got today. You have to go way up in the chat there to see it, but an article that I got today that talked about the fact that we have people who are having the backlash is rather clear in terms of people saying, what do we do? We don't want to do too much for black folks because we're seeing that there's less than a great deal of support for things like vaccinations, et cetera, and we've had that as an issue. And I mean you can take a look at it, but that's the kind of stuff that we're struggling with. We did, however, manage to get $62 million designated to go to just black folks in the state of Oregon during when the money started coming from the federal government, because we recognized that a lot of the black businesses, a lot of the black folks were simply not getting the money. The black businesses certainly were not, because they didn't have the same kind of long-term impact, long-term connection with the banks. And so we put together a $62 million. Now, it was challenged after we had spent about $55 million of it. It was challenged by one person who tried to attack it, and another person. And they officially got folks to reassess it. But by that time, as I said, $55 million had already been sent out to all 36 counties in the state. And we were able to really make a case not only for financial assistance, but also health care and other things. And we're still in the process of doing that. We got a lot of things changed in terms of public safety. A lot of the bills that I began working on, and this goes back to something that Dr. Samuels mentioned too, a lot of the bills that I started working on in 2010 finally passed in 2020, in special sessions in 2020. In 2021, we managed to get bills regarding public safety, police accountability issues. All of those things suddenly we were able to pass because we had demonstrations here, and because folks began to recognize that folks were not stopping to. This was not going to be a one-time situation, and that started to make a difference. We're still passing bills, and I'll find the link, and I'll send that to you, of some of the bills that we managed to pass in what we call the BIPOC caucus. But it took a while, and it took a lot of folks working together. And my district does not have it has a larger black population than any of the other districts in the state, but it's not that large generally. And a lot of gentrification has moved a lot of folks out of my district to other places. So it's not a matter of having a black majority by any means. There's no black majority anywhere. It's a matter of getting people, the neighbors and others, to acknowledge that these are issues that long ago I was told, when white folks sneeze, black folks get pneumonia. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we began to make that point to a lot of the folks who are here. And that includes, in education, it includes healthcare. You were talking, I think, Mr. Young, you were talking about the food deserts. We began to work on that by way of just going. We knew that we had convenience stores that were in the Black community, and many of those convenience stores had only lemons and limes for drinks and everything in the convenience stores. So we went in as a county. We went in and we asked if we could put in a refrigerator unit. If we put a refrigerator unit, we paid for a refrigerator unit. Would they put would they put non-perishable or perishable foods in that unit? Something that was fresh food in that unit, and they began to do that. So we now have that in a lot of the sections of the city because we still didn't get the big supermarkets necessarily to move in. But they are able to get some fresh food because of that kind of thing. So we had to try to find novel ways to get around and make some changes that way.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator Lou Frederick. I want to read a summary to kind of sum us up. And Timothy, think about if you have one more question, but I want to read this as we close because it's a good backdrop. As I close us out tonight, and it's a quote from the article I sent you guys, Malcolm X summed up conservative thinking in this way. He says certain Americans, well, I put certain, but white Americans. I put certain because I know it's more than white Americans. Do not try to eliminate evil because it's evil, or because it's illegal, or because it's immoral. They eliminate it only when it threatens their existence. When one is on top, it is only natural they would attempt to remain there by any means necessary. And when one is on the bottom, it is only natural that they would negotiate for some measure of fairness. But you see, in capitalism's version of democracy, no one is really looking for fairness. However, they are looking for more. Even those who have accumulated more wealth than 160 million of their fellow citizens combined still wake up every morning trying to figure out how they can get even more. So since nothing is going to curb our innate drive for more, the question then becomes whether to continue driving it down the path of an ever-widening disparity or to begin steering it towards some more inclusive emerging future for us all. I want to thank y'all for being here tonight. Thank you, my brother Timothy. Thank you, Senator Lou Frederick, for dropping in. Thank you, LeBron, for letting us know what's happening in your area. Thank you, Southern Soul audience. Look forward to talking to you guys again. And as y'all know, I'm going to play a few of my daddy's records because that's how I relax and release from the evening. But it's been an awesome session. I look forward to seeing you guys soon and talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining us at Southern Soul Livestream Talk Show. Join us weekly at soullivestream.com. If you're joining us live, we'll take a quick music break and then come back for discussion with the audience.